Welcome back, everybody, to our two-part episode on the NHS and COVID-19. And we welcome back our two special guests and newly qualified NHS nurses, Ella Daniels and Georgia Duffy. So we're reaching you from Edinburgh in Scotland. Listeners, welcome back. We've just had a quick catch-up to see how things have been going for Ella and Georgia since we last spoke to them during episode 1, and it sounds like a lot has changed for them in terms of their working practices and the arrangements of dealing with COVID patients in hospitals. I think one of the great things about doing a two-part episode is you get to zone in on two different time periods within the same pandemic. So hopefully you can get some new insights from this second discussion. So delving straight into the discussion and to frame things for our listeners. So Ella and Georgia, it sounds like there's a lot of change that's been going on in your workplaces at the moment. And it sounds like things have maybe settled down a little bit from the initial kind of hysteria and organising of the initial outbreak. It's also interesting to hear about the behaviours of patients that you observe. When I recently called my doctor's surgery in regards to whether it was possible to have a telephone appointment, they said that the NHS was still functioning all the way throughout the initial outbreak for regular appointments. And they'd actually, seen a significant drop in people taking up normal doctor's appointments because people just weren't aware that the services were carrying on. So it does feel like there's a little bit more of the old life, a little bit more normality coming through now. Absolutely, that things have settled and we've got out of the initial hysterical outbreak, which was really kind of shrouded in fear and mania and misinformation and hysteria and uncertainty, which was obviously propelled by the media. For example, the coverage of panic buying then reinforced panic buying behavior, and we had these very frantic, urgent feeling daily press conferences from the government, and now that's kind of settled, and the BBC isn't doing these kind of live updates of death tolls so much, and minute by minute accounts of whatever political announcements. It does feel like it's settled into a little bit more of a calmer place. And that hysteria is engulfing people's perceptions as much. And I've also noticed that the landscape of Edinburgh city centre has changed. Where I live has changed a lot. At the beginning, it was like a ghost town. You could hear a pin drop in the night. But now people are kind of pushing the boundaries of the lockdown policies, and you're seeing these kind of, I don't know, maybe everyday acts of resistance going on, and people's behaviour isn't as motivated by fear. Obviously, I want people to be safe, but I think what is maybe positive about that is that people's internal realities and their behaviours aren't so motivated by this kind of paralysed sense of fear.
I just hope everyone's still... I did, definitely notice there are more people out and about, and to me, I've seen a lot more groups of people. Now, they totally could be living together. There are lots of reasons for it, but I really do hope people are still taking it as seriously. I don't know.
Today's big announcement day anyway, isn't it? Yeah. So the Scottish government, I think, will go opposite to the English government on the rules, because it has been so different, the effects across the countries.
Oh, do you think the Scottish government will have a more liberal approach?
No, it's actually, the way I said that, it sounded like that, but I actually think it will be the opposite, because I think we have maybe been more successful, if you can say that. That might be through just geographical luck, but we've definitely had obviously a lower death rate, maybe proportionately to the population. It doesn't seem that way, but I think the Scottish government will keep us on a strict lockdown by comparison to what England do. That's the rumours anyway in the hospital. But
yeah, the amount of gossip and fake news and commentary and YouTube videos, well, even this podcast, you know, there's many perhaps speculative elements to it. And I wonder what the like social and psychological functions are of gossip, whether it's you know, to gain a sense of control over a situation, whether it's kind of an act or a ritual of connecting with other people around you and then connecting those connections to events, or whether it's just something to do in you know, stressful and unpredictable times. So moving on, my next question to you both, Ella and Georgia, is what do you wish was different in the NHS and for nurses? You've both been extremely positive thus far, both in the previous episode and in this one. But what do you wish was different? Whether that relates to more PPE, more pay, better transport for nurses.
No, I was just going to say, just kind of on my earlier point, I actually feel the conditions are better right now, because the one thing that I always felt was this, the NHS is underprivileged and understaffed, and a lot of people focus on the pay, like the low pay for nurses, which to me is, you know, it is a problem, but it's not the primary problem. I always think it's the staffing that is the problem, because nurses, you can't do it's a 24-hour care, and if there's not enough of you, you can't physically, that's the problem that I always find, is that there's not enough staff, and nurses would much rather have more staff than more money, because like you go home at the end of your day and you're not like, oh, well, I got a good pay today. You're like, oh, my patients were well cared for because I was well supported and there was enough staff. And that probably is the biggest impact on you and your well-being, is how well you can care for your patients. And I think that needs to be supported through more staff as opposed to finances. So finances indirectly, as in bringing in more students as such. And I think the good thing maybe to come out of this has been life, and the pace is a lot slower. So it's been easier for us in ways that we can park at the hospital. It's easier for us to get into work.
That's crazy how much of a difference that has made to staff, I think, and staff mood is the free parking. It's
it's crazy.
One less thing for staff to have to worry about, getting into work, parking for free. And I really hope that I don't think it will continue, but it would be amazing if it did.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, this is what we had a meeting with the kind of head of the sites, the Western and the Royal, and that was the primary concern that was raised by all the nurses, was this. They were saying, you know, is there anything positive that you've noticed out of this that you would like to continue? And everybody said the parking and the access, because the parking at the Western is saved for the patients' visitors. So there is parking, but the nurses don't have access to it.
Yeah.
Now there's no visitors, so they have it. But yeah, it seems like such a minuscule thing, but it's made such an impact for people, such a difference.
Yeah, it sounds small, but when you've got a long, you know, basically you can find yourself already having challenges before you've even started your shift. If you've got to think about, like, right, how am I going to get to work? Where am I going to park? How long is my walk going to be from where I park to work? Or how much it's going to cost me to, you know, you can spend more than an hour's wage just on parking for your shift. And I find that crazy.
Absolutely. And there are long shifts to have a long commute as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't believe they charge for staff car parking.
Yeah.
It's honestly astronomical. It's like, is it $7.50 or $12.50? It's something crazy anyway.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable. And as you say, Georgia, I think that's such a good point. The left often argues for greater investment in the NHS from the state. And yeah, absolutely. That is, a foundational need. But just throwing money at a service isn't necessarily going to, wave a magic wand and solve all of its issues. Like you say, that needs to be invested in the right places. I mean, there's already a couple of things that I've picked up on what you've both said now. If they alleviated car parking charges, and if they made sure that each shift was well staffed, that would then prevent so many other costly problems, like patients' treatment being prolonged. When you fail to invest in something properly in the first place, it then has secondary knock-on effects of cost, and you end up having to pay more to repair those issues. And a healthy workforce is also an effective and productive workforce. If you have a workforce that's, not starting off their shift already frazzled from this mental load of where do I park my car? And, am I going to be able to get into, the wing that I need to, in terms of where I park and, and sitting in traffic and, these are not things that are kind of conducive to starting off your shift in the best possible way.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think like you say, it's just about feeling valued, and these little things, if they prioritise you feel valued and you're more happy to be at work. I think it's just another case of them exploiting the angel narrative. It's like, oh well, it's not that big of a deal, it's just parking, it's fine, and I guess in nurses' work scenario, when they're during their shift and they're looking at other people's lives and social situations, sometimes, they do get that feeling of guilt and they try to put it into perspective. But actually, this has shown that it is the little things that totally make your day better.
Yeah, 100%. I have another thing that I do wish was, a couple of things that I wish were different at the moment. Obviously, this whole, the inadequate supply of personal protective equipment and stuff in locations where there aren't enough. For me, actually, where I am in A&E, we've got we're doing fine for PPE, but you're hearing about a lot of places where there isn't enough, and fundraising, it's all well and good, and it shows an amazing kind of sense of what word am I looking for? Everyone coming together from the public. But ultimately, the NHS isn't a charity, and we shouldn't have to rely on the generosity of the public to provide what is an essential piece of equipment. And without getting too political or anything, the government wasn't prepared for this. PPE should have come out of a properly planned and adequately resourced budget. And I just think that it feels like such a, it's not a huge piece of equipment. We're not, it's not something worth thousands and thousands of pounds. It's PPE. It's, gloves, masks, aprons. And the fact that there's not enough. Again, I feel like with what George is saying, just because we're, people say we're good people and doing a good job, doesn't mean we should be okay with an increased risk when we go to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. You're just asking for basic needs to be met.
100%.
There's already campaigns starting around no return to unsafe workplaces. So I do encourage our listeners to get involved in them if they can, and they're campaigns that are geared towards, ensuring that the likes of, key workers, they don't return to unsafer working environment, because as you say, because of the pandemic, it's quite a set of special circumstances, which might mean that you actually might be qualifying in an environment that might be the kind of best you're going to see under this government. And the concern is that once this pandemic has settled, in inverted commas, whatever that future looks like, then the conditions are going to return to normal. Although I'm not a nurse myself, I do know what it's like to be working in services that are there to support people. So when I worked in the charity sector and we dealt with people who had poverty-related issues, and I remember looking around the workplace several times and just thinking, there is not enough staff here. And at points it would just reduce me to tears. And it wasn't that there wasn't enough money, or that there wasn't, I don't know, the resources out there to make this scenario better. It was a case where just the amount of people queuing up at our door was just unbearable, and, you know, was a result of austerity. And the same can be said for a lot of health issues. And then, you know, you've got a team of just a handful of people that are not only dealing with a large volume, but also very, very complex issues that need to be dealt with sensitively and can't just be ticked off and shoved out the door.
Yeah, definitely. And it's such a shame. I think when you're doing a job and the one reason you can't do it properly is because there's just not enough bodies, it just feels like such a shame.
Yeah, it's just, you can't compute how it is that situation, because you're like, I know there's people out there that could do this.
Yeah. I think another thing as well, I think about at the moment, and I don't know if it's because I'm from England myself and because you know, if I had come to nursing 1 year later, this would have been me. But I really wish that the English bursary hadn't been scrapped for nurses. I keep thinking about how there's a whole cohort of students in England right now who are in the same position as Georgia and I, you know, they've just graduated, you know, so they're, you know, got the worries of graduating during this pandemic, but also they've got the extra worry of having a debt of £27,000 on top of that. And I guess regardless of coronavirus, I really wish that the bursary was still there for nurses, just because, you know, how it affects an already understaffed workforce and also prevents so many decent potential nurses from being able to financially access the course and become nurses. And I think, God, it's such a shame. I wish that was not the case.
I mean, that's just so crazy. I mean, the government needs people to become nurses. Why would you make it?
Yeah, I mean, they have 101 reasons why. They've tried to explain it, but every time I read them, I'm just like, nope, I don't think that is a reason enough. Because they have seen a huge drop as soon as they got rid of the bursary. I can't remember what the percentage was, but a huge percentage drop in applicants, and it's continued to drop. Fingers crossed they'll bring it back 1 year. I think they will, but for now, yeah, you've got nursing students that are going through this with a hell of a lot of debt, and I just, you know, shout out to them because I couldn't do it.
So just for the benefit of our listeners, Ella, can you, or Georgia, what is this bursary that used to be in place, because our listeners may not be aware of it?
Oh, just that, you know, nursing has historically been funded. So we didn't have to pay our course fees, so we didn't have to pay the $9,000 a year. And I guess the way that kind of worked was they fund us through our degree, and then we work for the NHS or, you know, when we're on our placements, because, you know, we do full-time work for, you know, for roughly 6 to 8 weeks, 3 times a year, unpaid. And whenever I'm on my shifts and I think, oh God, I'm not getting paid for this, in my head I think, oh, actually, but I am, because they're paying for my degree. But as of when did I joined in 2016. So I think in 2017 they scrapped that in England. So now everyone, if you want to study nursing, you have to pay.
Yeah, the Scottish students' experience is a bit different because we don't pay for tuition fees for any course, but we also additionally get the bursary. So we get £500 a month for like living expenses. Only nurses get that. Students still take loans for living expenses, but nurses don't. They don't owe that money back after the end of the 4 years or the 3 years, depending on what course you take. But the Scottish government, at the same time, the English government scrapped the bursary, increased it. So next year's initial cohort will be getting £800 a month, I think. Was it?
Basically, Scotland is great. England needs to take some advice from Scotland.
I mean, yeah, with things like this is a testament, right? Or like an experiment, that allows you a political experiment that allows you to see the distinct differences in terms of like economic and political models between Westminster and Holyrood, you know, England and Scotland. And this will obviously resonate with you, Ella, but I've lived most of my life in England and moved to Scotland to do my PhD, and it was really, really noticeable to me how I kind of moved away from this really kind of aggressive form of capitalism and Scotland still has that as well. They have like Virgin sponsoring the Royal Mile during the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and so on. The SNP have a lot to answer for in terms of, how they've opened up Scotland to corporations, but it's nowhere near as aggressive. England does feel like a little America in terms of this debt and the struggles of just going to university and everything being so expensive and no subsidies and, prescriptions are like £4,000 and then you come to Scotland and you're like, oh, my prescription's for free.
Yeah. No, it's a good place. Anyone thinking about coming to Scotland, I would recommend.
Also, Edinburgh's a bit of a unique pocket of Scotland. I don't think it represents Scotland very well. I think it's probably more right than left by comparison.
Oh yes, absolutely, because it's historically and currently a wealthy and elite city. That really is kind of the hub of tourism and all things commercial, and then you get a train out for like 15 minutes somewhere else and it's like this idea difference, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I'm from the West Coast, and every time like I'm home and then I come back to Edinburgh, my brother's like, oh, you're way back to England. Very funny.
Okay, so shall we move on to our next question? So my next question to you is, what qualities and skills do you admire in yourself and other nurses when confronting a crisis and uncertainty? So when you look to your colleagues or when you observe the practice of other people during the pandemic, what would you like to be more, who or what would you like to be more like? What qualities are you hoping to develop from this crisis that maybe you didn't have as much of before?
I think, so for us, in terms of uncertainty at work, we as students, I mentioned earlier, so in one academic year, we'll go on 3 different placements. So 3 times a year, we'll go to a different location, we'll meet different staff, be working in a different, area of medicine. So we're quite used to kind of fitting in and acclimatizing to new situations and, not knowing what to expect on each placement. So I feel like over the 4 years, we have kind of developed qualities that allow us to be comfortable with uncertainty and adapt. So I don't know if you feel the same, Georgia, but
yeah, no, absolutely.
In that sense, starting a new job doesn't feel as daunting because you feel like you've already done it 3 times a year for 4 years. Yeah, go for it, George.
So, I was just going to say I almost liken it to the fact that I've just started a new placement and it's in infectious diseases. Yeah. It's like what they do day in, day out.
Exactly. And in terms of qualities and skills, I think, it's a very standard one, and there are actually a lot of other jobs that require this, but kind of your ability to put your own needs and feelings aside and completely focus on the other, which, that's kind of a basic requirement in any kind of giving job. But even during all this, having seen nurses, mums with young kids and husbands who are unwell and people that have had to separate themselves from their families. And these are not small things. These are big things. I know mums that aren't living with their young children at the moment, yet when they get to work, that's kind of put to one side and they just plod on with everything without complaining. And I really admire that. And I think that I've seen that kind of, it's not just at work, with all my nursing friends, I see that that's not just what happens with them at work. So for example, Georgia, she can have 100, this is my experience of our friendship, is that she can have 101 things going on in her life, yet always seems to remember and manage to check in on everyone else around her. And I think that's something I admire in a lot of nurses, and I see that in Georgia as well. So
Well, yeah, not to just throw that back at you, but I would say that is your number one quality. It's, no, absolutely. That's what I always think. Ella, I think, has definitely taught me to be, maybe to slow down, actually, is maybe the thing. And I think I'm definitely better with my patients as a result of you telling me to check in with my own emotions. So we're definitely a really good group. I think we all complement each other well.
Yeah.
In our cohort and in just nurses in general. We're such a diverse group.
We are.
I think it really is beautiful to work.
And is that diversity, I don't know, conducive to the work? And does, you know, that mixture of skills and qualities make for an effective workforce of nurses, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember it depends on the area. But what I have noticed, the more placements and the more areas I've gone in, is the diversity, and I think it's people recognise people's strengths and skills, and you definitely need them all, and they all have a place. And I think nurses are good at recognising that quite early on, and then adapting the team as suits.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I think another quality that I admire is that kind of this ability. I think there's a lot of nurses that get this right. The balance between being serious and having a laugh. I myself, I'm quite insecure with making. I'm quite an overthinker, so I struggle to sometimes maybe have a laugh because I'm so worried about offending. But I've seen so many of my colleagues be quite funny and a bit, out there with their patients, and I'm always like, oh gosh, but actually that's what makes the patient laugh or relax. And I think when you've got the balance between being serious and having a laugh, it can sometimes really lighten the mood at work. And I really admire that in a lot of individuals, actually.
Yeah, no, because it is an amazing emotional intelligence in people when they can adapt their personality to the patients. They can recognise where like a joke is appropriate or where the mood can be lightened, or if they just need someone to listen.
Exactly.
I think my mum has said to me actually that her greatest kind of quality or skill that she brings to her work is her sense of humour, because my mum can literally have a laugh about everything from like disaster to death to, a manager being shitty, or, whatever it is, she can create humour that is like both appropriate and, and it doesn't cross the line too much, but also, it's just what everybody needs in that moment to lighten the mood. And I think that is such an amazing quality. I really admire that in people that I see who can create that balance. Do you know what I mean? Of like, of making fun of a very serious situation in a way that doesn't cross boundaries. It really is a skill.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I suppose I'd like to chime in there with the qualities and skills that maybe I appreciate in times of stress and crisis. I had a manager once. She was like 2 managers above me. She was like the director, so she wasn't my direct line manager. And I asked her one day, how does she do it all? Like, she is a director, she has children, she manages to go on holiday, she wrote very successful policy work. I said, how the hell do you do it? And she said, Poppy, I'm not a perfectionist. You're a perfectionist and I'm not a perfectionist. As long as my kids are adequately fed, as long as there's adequate petrol in the car, as long as what I've written is adequate, as long as all of my team have had adequate attention that day, then I've done my job. I don't try and meet these kind of hyper expectations or this kind of golden bar, which is just a bar that exists internally to your emotional reality. It's not something that exists externally that people are expecting of you.
Wow, that now you've just said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is me. I am so not a perfectionist. And I think that's probably what I'm insecure about, is sometimes I'm like, maybe I should be more of aiming for the gold star, but that's made me feel better.
Oh, I think it's amazing. I'm a huge admirer of people whose houses are just like a tip, and they're like, yeah, so what, you know? Or like, you know, they've just spilt something everywhere and they're like, yeah, it's a spill, you know? and whereas those things would like consume me with instantaneous stress, and I would feel the need to instantly perfect whatever it is, whether it's a room or a piece of cloth or whatever the situation is. I have this like visceral urge to immediately like rectify and verify the situation. But I'm a huge admirer of people that are a bit more mindful in life. I can just allow, I don't know, like situations to drift over them like water off a duck's back, you know, with waxy feathers, and it just like it comes off, you know, and you recognize the water is there, but it doesn't drown you. It doesn't saturate your feathers, you know.
But that's exactly why it's like what you mentioned earlier when you asked us, you know, is it good having a diverse workforce in terms of like qualities and skills? You know, having that mix, you know, you see that in someone else and then maybe they're looking at you thinking, oh, I wish I was a bit more relaxed, and you can both kind of draw something out of each other that, you know, I think that's why it's so good for everyone to, you know, everyone to be different without sounding too cliche.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I just never stop learning from my colleagues. Yeah, there's the kind of like, there's the expertise side of things, but I would say my biggest learnings are always around behavior and qualities. You know, when you see a colleague that's really dealt with a situation amazingly, and you just learn so much from that, I find.
Yeah.
So moving on to our last question, I think this is, a very appropriate question to finish on, especially because we started talking about like how things are going recently. And so I think we'll do a bit of a full circle and finish off. We started off on the topic of kind of like, where's the lockdown going? And we'll almost finish off on that note. So my final question is, has qualifying and or working during the pandemic changed your world perspective in any way? So, you know, has working within the parameters of this crisis and this lockdown, how has that changed your world perspective? What are your takeaways from it?
Oh, I'm just loving the new pace of life. I just think it's rare to be forced into it, you know, and that makes it sound like it's a chore, but I guess you don't notice how fast your life is or the things you're doing because you enjoy them in a lot of the things you elect to do. So it just has been really nice to, on my days off, just really digest and yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong, like I miss a lot of the busyness and I definitely thrive off of that. But it's been a nice perspective, even just observing everybody else's way of life and, you know, having Zoom meetings with people that, you know, I wouldn't normally. It's just been a new way of life and it's had its perks. And not forgetting the extremely privileged situation I'm in, absolutely. But yeah. There's definitely positive and negatives to it, but luckily I've had a positive experience.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's exposed the kind of, I think, good and bad in us as a society. I mean, all these beautiful fundraising and, you know, people taking food to their neighbours and lots of really wonderful things have happened. And then on the other hand, you know, I've definitely seen things that maybe people being a little bit, I think, and it's difficult not to do this, but people kind of, I don't know, almost, you know, maybe they've posted something on social media in a way that kind of makes it feel like it's just them experiencing this pandemic. Kind of, I don't know if anyone else has had this, but like sometimes people are posting stuff on social media and it will be complaining about something and I'm like, yeah, we're all, that's the same for everyone right now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of forced everybody to face their reality.
Yeah.
Albeit what it is.
I don't know really what my point is saying. It's just, I feel like I've read a few things that people might have posted and just come away from it feeling annoyed, feeling like that they're kind of forgetting that, yeah, I'm not taking away, you know, everyone's situation is their own and it's very real and they're experiencing that. But it's, you know, we are all everyone is affected in some way at the moment. And for me, that's actually what I find comforting about this whole thing, is that every time I'm like, oh God, I'm really bummed out that this isn't happening, I'm like, oh yeah, it's not happening for everyone in the world right now. So
I think that's a really important point. I think that social media and capitalism, of course, have these very individualizing effects that make people think that their experiences are isolated. And there's also so much judgment that's being thrown around during the pandemic. People just posting these really, really judgmental Facebook posts, listing all of the people in society that are responsible for the pandemic.
I think as well, qualifying right now during the pandemic has definitely, I actually think it's quite a nice time for us to be beginning our careers, because there is a lot of recognition for us. I mean, I have people messaging me saying congratulations on qualifying that absolutely I haven't spoken to in years, and there's no way, if this wasn't all going on, that they would recognize my graduation. So I definitely feel like in that sense, it's a nice time to qualify. I feel definitely feel appreciated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder if that is probably a combination of the fact that you're graduating as a nurse and people are at home, almost like they've got more to check in, and yeah,
they've got the time.
Yeah, is it because they previously were all consumed by work, uni, immediate family and friends?
Yeah. And it's nice. I think it's nice, like you say, Georgia, this time to slow down. You realise actually what you're missing is not what you think. It's like me and George were talking about it the other day, how actually, we're not missing all these great, amazing things. We just miss each other, or having a coffee together, or having a hug. It really, again, without sounding too cliche, it really is the small things. And I really, really hope that after all this, I'm not sure how much and how long it will last, but I really do hope that this slower pace and this kind of, being comfortable with not always being super productive, it's like you say, on your days off, sometimes you don't feel rested from your days off because there's this pressure to make every day productive and have achieved something every day. And then you're back at work and you're like, gosh, I don't even feel like I've had a weekend because I just filled this day with more stuff and another to-do list. And I think it's quite nice, this slower way of life.
Absolutely. So is there anything that you would both like to quickly finish on before we wrap up? Is there anything final that you would like to say?
Just a little shout out maybe to the nursing school at Edinburgh Uni, because I do feel like they've been really, really supportive, especially Sarah Rhinus. This is a lady who I'm sure is getting 101 messages from all of the students every day, asking questions that nobody knows the answer to, yet we continue to ask her. And she's been really, really great. So
she just does everything with ease and consider for everybody. I mean, she is somebody I'm in awe of.
Yeah, definitely. So got to say thank you to her.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were very focused on all the hospitals, but shout out to the care homes and all the care staff, because they have a far tougher job than the hospitals right now. And everyone, all the key workers, all the key workers that aren't getting, there's the healthcare workers are getting a lot of the credit at the moment. But there are 101 professions keeping us all going right now. So yeah, my postman, for example, shout out to you.
podcast during the pandemic is like everything that you can imagine to like go wrong has gone wrong. I've had like people's dogs like literally not stop barking in the background, or like a baby that is literally screaming at like a pitch that like shatters a window, or like people's Wi-Fi is just like every 5 seconds it's dropping out. It's almost very beautiful in a way, do you know what I mean? Because it's just so, again, you know, linking back to what I just said, it's like it's so imperfect and so fragmented, and like we're having to come back on because like 15 minutes of content has just fucking disappeared. And it's like, you know, you learn to kind of move with that imperfection and that unpredictability.